All right, let's get started. Welcome to the session on Effecting Change, the Art of Leading Teams. My name is Venkat Subramaniam. It's a great pleasure to have you all here, so let's get started. I want to talk a bit about how could we be effective in essentially making change. This could be at an organizational level. You could be a person at the C level of an organization trying to move an organization in a different direction. It could be at a team level. Maybe you're a project manager. You want to change how your team can move forward and attain success. This could be at an individual level. It could be something where we want maybe a small group, maybe you're part of a sports team that works on a weekend to organize events. It could be at a family level, whatever that could be. But mostly I want to focus on what we can do as an organization, as a team, how we can effect such change. I'm a huge fan of this particular quote by Thomas Paine, lead, follow, or get out of the way. And I think it's important for us to really, when I interact with teams, I often say, I am not interested in agreement. Agreements are extremely a tall order. Those of us who are married know this. It's very difficult for even two people to agree on things. How could you expect an entire team to agree on things together collectively? So I often don't ask for agreement. I ask for alignment. And to me, alignment simply means I don't have to agree on every single detail, but I'm aligned towards the major goal we want to achieve as a team. And we should be aligned to say, here's what we want to do as a team. Collectively, we are here right now, but here's where we want to be. How we get there are the tactics. And you and I may not agree on the tactics, but we are definitely aligned on the overall objective as to where we want to go and why we want to go there. So I think we should really think about alignment, and it really helps if we can communicate that effectively with the team to say, we really want alignment of the team towards the goals that we want to achieve in the long run. Now, how can we really achieve that? And part of the problem often we get into is, you're probably sitting there thinking, this is so obvious to me why we want to make this change. But yet it's so hard. Why doesn't anybody else see it? Or why can't they be on board to make this change happen? And why is there so much resistance? Why is there so much suspicion to move in that direction? And so often, I speak in a lot of conferences, and this happens at so many levels. People were to come to me and say, you know what, I really see this, but how do I, this word I often hear from people ask me is, how do I convince everybody else around me? So often the question is, I am interested in doing this kind of programming. I'm interested in using this kind of method. I want to use this particular framework. I want to be able to work differently as a company. And I want to make all these change, but how do I convince other people? How do I tell my colleagues? How do I tell my people who are reporting to me? How do I tell my boss? How do I convince other people? And with all respect, I often ask them one question. And the first and foremost question that's really hard for a lot of us to really stop and ask the question is, how can we convince others, we often ask. But the question I want you to ask yourself is, are you convinced? And we don't often pause to ask the question, am I convinced? We assume we are convinced. But deep down, maybe we're not really convinced. We have figured out this could possibly work, but we haven't thought through it. We haven't really examined it to really be able to support and reason why this might be a better way to do. So I think the first step in convincing anybody is to convince ourselves. And the way we convince ourselves is not by infatuation, not by hearing and saying, yeah, I heard about it, looks like a great idea. But one great way to convince ourselves is to really immerse into it, to practice it, to be the change. Just as one example, I've come across quite a number of architects and team leaders who would tell their teams, oh, we should do automated testing. but they themselves have not done automated testing, as one example. And they think that automated testing is really good and useful, but they haven't taken the time to really immerse themselves and gain the experience. So when they are asked the questions, the hard questions, how do you really do it in this particular situation, they don't have an answer for it to support it. So I think the first step in convincing anybody that something is good is to convince ourselves. And the way to convince ourselves is to really practice, to immerse, to experience it. And then I think we have enough to really be able to stand up and justify that this is actually really better for the rest of us to really practice. Now, when it comes to convincing other people to do something, we often are eager for them to adapt a particular solution. And we walk in and say, well, let me tell you how we can do this. But the first step in really helping the team to transition, to make a change, is to really take the time to understand the problem. Because if we don't understand the problem, we may effect a change, and after effecting the change, we still have the problem left behind. And now, not only have we not solved the real problem, we also eroded the trust of the people around us, because they say, you did all of these. There's a difference between progress and movement. We don't want movement. We want real progress. We want to show that we are actually effecting change and getting the results of the change. That's very important as well. So the first step in really solving a problem is to first understand it. And if we haven't really taken the time to understand it, what good is the change we're going to make? And shockingly, though, unfortunately, there's a lot of time we assume rather than explicitly stating it. I can't tell you how many times this actually happens. I'm a consultant. I go around and help organizations implement things, implement solutions. But one question, it took me a while to get to the point where I can confidently ask it. As a young developer, as a young person, you probably look at this and say, oh my gosh, they want us to do this, let me do it. But one thing I do quite often these days is I go in and ask a question, why do you want to do this? And they would look at me surprised and say, what do you mean? Why do you want to do it? It's obvious why you want to do it. It's like, no, explain to me, why do you want to do it? And there's been situations where they would ask me to help them to solve a problem in a certain way. An example, I was called by a company and they said, come work with us for 2 weeks, and here's the budget, pile of cash on the table, that's for you to take at the end of 2 weeks. So come on over and help us to implement the solution, and here is the solution we want to implement. And they're on board. The director is on board, the entire team is on board. Monday morning I show up and I say, what do you want to do? We want to apply these solutions. We know you're really good at these solutions, so teach us how to do it. I said, I'll be more than happy to. I know exactly how to do all of these. But if you don't mind me asking the question, why do you want to do this? And they look surprised. You know this technology. You should know why we want to do this. I said, no, but I want to know why you want to do this. Oh, because we don't like what we're doing right now. I said, okay. So you want to make this change because you're not happy with the way things are right now. When you're done with this, can you tell me how your users will benefit? Can you tell me what your users will do tomorrow or 6 months from now or a year from now, different from what they do today? Can you tell me how your company is going to make better revenue with this product after the change you make? And the answer was, gosh, we want to change this because we don't like it. So they had no real reason to make change except that they want to make a change. So yes, the reasons were there, but they were not good enough reasons to make the change, to take that commitment and take the journey. So the very first question we want to ask is, why do we want to make this change? What problem are we really trying to solve? If we understand the problem, then we could present many solutions to the problem. But if we understand only a solution, now we are going around looking for a problem to use that solution, which is not a very effective way to do things. And so a lot of times we take for granted, but it's important to take the time to understand the problem. The second thing as a leader, as anybody who wants to make a change, is definitely try not to push one solution. You probably have seen people do this. For everything you ask, it'll be one thing, whatever that one thing is. If we had done this way, it would have been a better place. I was in a company, and I won't mention the name of the language right now. This entire company was using one particular language. And I was talking to their VP of R&D, and I said, hey, I've been in your company for a while as a consultant. I've been going around. Now I have a question for you. How is that every single project, every single product in your company is built on that one language using that one framework? How is that? And he laughed and he said, oh, that's very easy to answer. And he said, there was a group of people we had a few years ago, and for every question, the answer was that technology. And in fact, they would work so hard to make sure that the answer will be the technology for every question that would get asked. So when you run around with the hammer, as they say, everything looks like a nail. So it's really important for us to not have an agenda to say, I want a particular solution to be used, but your goal must be to really for the team to succeed. So once we understand what the problem is, it's really important for us to find what solutions are available. If we are trying to really promote one particular solution, that may not be the right solution in the end. And in fact, a lot of times I say, when a problem is given to me, I want to see at least 3 different solutions. And let's evaluate them. Let's compare them. And we're not going to find the best solution because everything has trade-offs in it. But I want to really find a solution that is the better of the solutions we have thought about. So if a team has only one solution that they can ever work on and think of, that may be either a bias or that may be either an ignorance as well. So it's really important for us to bring multiple solutions together first and then try to evaluate them and then pick the solution. So it's important not to push one particular solution as an agenda. That's very important to promote a better success of the teams as well. Now, one really good way to make this happen is it's much better to work with an educated team rather than a team that is driven by an order. And to say, this is what you will do, and let's just do it. And an educated team is a lot more committed to solutions rather than a team driven by a command. If people on the team are convinced why a certain solution is good, then they're going to put their efforts into it. Rather than there are a few words that I really hate the most. When I talk to people, I cringe when they tell me, this is beyond my pay grade. I'm like, oh, please don't ever say that. This is beyond my pay grade, meaning I'm not involved in that decision, so I don't really have any influence on it. I'm just doing what I'm told to do. I don't want to be told to, doing what I'm told to do. I need to have a skin in the game, so I will drive the effort towards it because I feel that there is a reason to really support it. And one good way to do this is to educate the team and say, hey, here are the reasons why we want to make this change. Here are the options available. Let's go evaluate and pick the solution. A case in point, I'll give you an example of this, and I call this as the stagnant architectural committee and the VP of change. I was called into a company where the company had 7,000 programmers writing code. Now imagine a company where there are 7,000 programmers writing code, and the VP who called me said, the 7,000 programmers are writing code using a 15-year-old technology. And this is not working for me. We are incurring a lot of cost. It is getting expensive to develop the software. It is not a modern technology, and we need to change. And I asked him, what's the problem? Why can't you change? And he said, the reason is we have an architectural committee. This company had an architectural committee of 50 architects. The 50 architects were worse than the mafia. Because if you have to do anything in this company, it's got to be approved by the architects. If you ever do something that they did not approve, they will hunt you down. And this architectural committee had people who were programmers 20 years ago. And when you talk to them, the terms they would use is, when I used to write code. And I often say, one of the most dangerous situations to be in is to work with what are called PowerPoint architects. These are people who can do PowerPoint slides or other forms of slides, like I'm doing right now, but they can't really write code or don't have a clue how to write code, or they're obsolete. And these people have made decisions based on what they once knew. And they have architectural, reasoning that is outdated, and they have reference implementations of old technologies, and they have said, here is what you will use to build. And so the VP of R&D called me and said, come over here and tell my architectural committee that they need to change. I'm sorry, I can't do that. I cannot walk into a room of 50 people and say, you got to do things differently, and they'll say, why? Because your VP told me to come and tell you why. That's not going to fly. So what do we do? And the short answer is, first, there's no guarantees things can change, but we can try. And the very first thing you want to do is to educate your architects. If they are committed to making the change is going to happen. If they're not committed to making the change, it doesn't matter who comes and tells them, the change is not going to happen. So what we did essentially was, I said, give me 1 day. And in the morning, I will simply talk about what is possible, what options are available, and present why those are better options than what they've been doing. But I'm not going to talk about everything, but I'm not going to talk about one thing either. I don't want to give them a few different options that are available, why those options are better, what are the pluses, what are the minuses, and present it to them. And that's going to be in the morning. In the afternoon, let's just have an open conversation where they can ask any question they want to ask, and let them bring up and let them talk very freely. And so the afternoon was, how would you do this? And there were 3 different answers depending on the question they asked. For some questions they asked, here's how you will do it with this other technology, and here's why it's better. For some questions the answer was, you know what? It doesn't matter. You could do it in the old technology, or you could do it in the newer technology. It really doesn't matter. You can go either way. And for some questions, the honest answer was, you're better off doing it the way you did. You're not going to gain any benefit in doing it differently. And once the architects sat there, listened to these, and had examples to work with, and the recommendation was, go prototype these things. Get a feel for it yourselves, and see if it really solves your problems, and if these technologies are better. And 2 months went by, and the architectural committee went to the VP and said, we are ready to make the change. Because we have been informed, we have educated ourselves, we have done prototypes, and we have seen why these are better solutions. And now we want to make a change. And that took the entire organization towards going towards a newer technology, but a technology that the committee selected, not one that was told and said, here's what you would use. So an educated team is a lot better in making decisions and moving forward and succeeding than a team that's told what to do. And that's something we should really take the time to invest in and educate the team along the way so they can make better decisions. This also brings up one problem we often face. There is a fantastic book called The Paradox of Choice, and this is counter to what we often think about. If I come to you, randomly ask you, are you better off having fewer choices, or are you better off having more choices? I think most of us will answer, I want more choices. Because we often feel more choices are about freedom to choose from, and we are empowered that we had all these choices to take. Well, unfortunately, though, the evidence is to the contrary. The book talks about several such cases of a paradox of choice. For example, they talk about a store where they were selling jams and jelly, and the sales was doing really well. The customers would come to the store, they would go to the aisle where they had the jams, and they would make a purchase. And the store decided, hey, I'm going to put on the shelf 50 different types of jams and jellies so people have more choices. And the store noticed the sales actually dropped a lot below than what they were selling before. So they were confused. They were like, my goodness, we gave so many things, so you would expect the sales to go up, but the sales actually went down. And the reason is people looked at all of these and said, my gosh, I don't know what to buy. I'm not going to buy it this time. And so they postponed buying things, and they were not really convinced to buy those in those stores. They probably went elsewhere to buy it. So there is a range in which choices are effective. You want to have choices, but the more choices you have, the more confusion it creates. So if you want a team to make selection of things, you don't want to tell them, here are 20 things, go figure it out. That's going to be really frustrating for them. In the case I mentioned earlier about the architectural committee, we didn't go to them and say, here's a world full of options, go figure it out. We distilled it down and said, here are 4 different options to pick from, and here are the strengths and weaknesses. And you take these 4 and distill them down to maybe 1 or 2 you want to start focusing on. So essentially, the more choices we have, it could be more confusing. So if you want to effect change, you have to strike that balance. You don't want to push one solution to the team, that's one extreme. But don't go to the other extreme where you're trying to push many, many different solutions to the team and saying, take it. They're going to fail at it because it's going to get very frustrating. So more choices often means more uncertainty, and our ability to succeed often diminishes with too many choices. So you have to manage this properly, and you have to do your homework to evaluate and distill it and then say, hey, here are the options within which we want to really make the choices. What would those be? If things are really away and not really as relevant or practical for us to evaluate, then it's better to eliminate them than just to bring them in, at least at that level of making a decision. But focus not just on the problem alone you want to solve, but ask the question, why do you want to solve this problem? Like I mentioned earlier, understanding why you want to solve this problem can help us to know if the solutions we are choosing are really going to address those very concerns. But in addition to why, it's also important for us to deliver the message of how as well before it can be implemented fully. Because if we don't give the how, it becomes quite difficult. For example, I'll give you 2 examples of this. There was one company that wanted to go into a newer technology. And the entire team had never been exposed to this technology. But they went through and decided the next product they're going to build was going to be using that particular technology. Now, obviously, the team is a bit apprehensive. They're worried. We don't have experience in this. What are we going to do? How do we implement solutions with this? And what the manager did was to bring in a person who had the expertise in the technology and said, well, here is a person in-house, and you can consult with this person any time of the day. As you are designing your code, you can use that person to help you to design, help you to review, help you to solve your problems. So we have an in-house person who is going to show you the how to actually do this. And this can be really effective because you have somebody to walk you through. And this really comes back to a way of thinking about expertise. If you think about it, there is something called a drive-first model. Drive-first model talks about the competency of people in various in various areas. What's really interesting is a single person might be extremely competent for one thing and maybe totally incompetent for another thing. For example, I might exhibit a certain level of competency for a few things in writing software. But if you ask me to maybe, go scuba diving, I'm going to be freaking out. I'm going to say, my gosh, what are the best practices? What are the do's and don'ts? How do I do this? And God forbid, if you ever ask me to cook, it's going to be putting everybody under risk. So my competency is really low and I need more guidance. And if I'm going to do anything that I'm not good at, I need people to help me through it so that they can improve my competency by serving as a coach on the team. So as a person who is interested in effecting change, don't tell your team, that's what we want to do, go do it. Instead, bring in a person who is really competent at it and provide them to the team and say, this person is going to work with you to move you forward. As another example, there was a company in the Netherlands, and the project manager decided the team will do 100% automated testing on their product. But the team did not have competency to do automated testing. That was new to them. They know what automated testing is. They know about unit testing tools and other tools, but they haven't really experienced it. So one of the things the manager did was to bring in somebody who was really familiar with automated testing and say, your job is to pair with this team and help them to write automated tests on the code on a daily basis until they get very comfortable and competent doing it. So providing that ability for them to rely upon as a guiding force to show the how, as they say, to show the ropes, is extremely important for us to become really effective. Now, so find what works and amplify it. If you're trying to really solve a problem, you may be frustrated. And sometimes it's easy for us to throw our hands up and say, my gosh, the problems are too many. We cannot solve any of these. And if you really look at organizations where there's been change, you are not effecting change because everything was great. You are effecting change in spite of everything not being great. One of the worst ways to try to effect change is to expect an ideal situation. How many times you hear people say, if only my management understood all these things? Well, unfortunately, that will never take us towards a solution. We cannot have a management that understands everything as much as you can have developers who understand everything or testers who understand everything and so on. So as a result, we want to effect change in the situation we have, not expect an ideal situation. An example of this is the story of Jerry Stern and what's called the Vietnam kids malnutrition. So this was a story where Jerry and his team were invited to Vietnam, and his goal was to really help children who were suffering and dying because of malnutrition. And so when he goes into the villages in Vietnam, he saw that the children were very weak. They were having a lot of ailments. And he was really trying to find out how to really improve the lives of these children. And he looks around and he finds that the government was corrupt. And he finds that there was a lot of resistance to change. And people had biases. People didn't want to do things differently. And there were political and social limitations to what could be done. And Jerry could have spent his time saying, if only your government was not corrupt, if people were really truthful, if you were willing to change, that would be a better place. And that was the easiest way to get kicked out of the country. That's not going to be any helpful at all. And so what he did, he looked around and started looking at children, and he saw a lot of children were really suffering and in poor health. And then he saw that there were children also who were pretty healthy. and they were really strong, and they didn't have all these problems. And so he started really talking to the parents of those children who were doing really, really well and said, what are you doing? What are you feeding the children? And what he found was that those children who were healthy, they were being fed a certain type of food which was really not expensive at all. But the children were getting that kind of nutrition, these other children were not. So all he did, he found really that little, bright spot to say, aha, look, it's working over there. It's not working over here. What is it that they are doing that these people are not doing? And he found that differentiator. He found that one thing that was being provided to these children, and it turned out it was not expensive type of food. And all he did was slowly but surely talk to the parents and say, why don't we start adding this into the food you're giving to the children, and let's see how they are doing. And within a matter of months, the children who are really suffering through malnutrition were suddenly getting better in their health. And what was remarkable here is he didn't have to change the society or the system or the corrupt government in order to save the children. All he had to change was just one thing that was working already in their society, but for a smaller group, and find that bright spot and amplify it elsewhere to say, let's go effect this change. This can be a really effective way for us to effect change in general. We can find out what's working. Oftentimes in an organization, I find that it's really funny. When I go to large companies, I would be walking around and I would find out things that work in one part of the company is unknown in other parts. And I would be talking to these people and say, we've never heard of this. I'm like, but just on the second floor, they're already using it. But yet these people have never heard about it. And all you have to do is not a whole lot to say, hey, I got an idea for you. Have you spoken to Sarah from the second floor? And they're like, who's Sarah? Let me introduce Sarah to you. And Sarah can help you how to do this because they're doing it in her team already. And all you have to do is to find people within the company who are practicing really good things and just help them to really help other people in the same company. And you can amplify that really nicely for getting the results, if you will, that can be really effective in general. So success, of course, needs both behavioral goals and behavioral changes. You may have really good goals, but if you're not willing to change what you do and how you do it, it becomes incredibly difficult to get the results. And so if we want to get a different result, we may have to put a different effort into it. We may have to put a little bit of an effort, a change in the way we do things if we want to get a different result. And if we don't, it becomes really hard to get the changes. As Einstein said, the definition of insanity, he said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different results the next time. How many times have we seen it? You see companies saying, we terribly failed on this time. Yeah. We want to succeed the next time. That's good. You have that goal. And what are you going to do? The same thing again. Right? How could you get a different result if you don't change what you do? So we have to ask the question, if I want to get that result, what can I do differently to achieve that result? So a change in behavior becomes really important for us to achieve the change and get that result we want. An example of this is something that is really weird. Because if everybody in this room, we are people driven by logic. We are logical in everything we do. You look at a problem and you say, that doesn't make any sense. If this is the input, that should be the output, right? We are driven by logic. In a way, we're kind of boring in that way, right? Because we look at everything as a state machine. You have this input, you get that output. And if somebody says something contrary to it, we're like, really? How could that be possible? Well, this was a story in Brazil in the mid-1990s. the economy started declining really terribly. In fact, we all know what this means right now because the world is going through this right now, isn't it? They had in 1990s 80% inflation rate. So, in other words, they would go to the store to buy something today, and they would go to the same store the next day to buy the same item, and the price would have gone up by 80% or more. In fact, it was a problem because people were getting really frustrated. And people actually started going into stores and hacking the price tags so that they can buy products at a cheaper price than what is posted because people were scared they cannot afford to buy things. The milk was expensive by the day. And to make things worse, they had a finance minister who did not know economics, which is not surprising because in a lot of parts of the world, we have politicians who know nothing about what they actually do, including my own country. And essentially, that's one of the biggest challenges is to have a finance minister who doesn't understand anything about finance. But he was really good at one thing. It's not that he didn't understand economics. He knew he did not understand economics. And so he realized he's got to go bring people who actually understand it to solve this particular problem. And he did something quite unimaginable. What he did was he went and invited Bacha and economists, 3 other people who were educated from Yale and who were working in Brazil at that time. And he told them, you need to help us to turn on the economy. What can you do? And these 3 people did something that is completely unimaginable. They decided the only way they can rescue this economy is to really bring confidence into people's mind. Because people have completely lost confidence in the economy and they were not going to stop and they were really in a paranoia at this point. So the only way you can change is to bring confidence into people. And so they said they would create an illusion of stability in a world they were living in where nothing was stable. And so what they did actually is to create this illusion. They introduced a new currency. This was a fictitious currency. This didn't exist at all. So there was a real currency, and they introduced a fictitious currency along the way. And they said that this fictitious currency will be posted for every product that is being sold in the market as to what the price of a product is in this fictitious currency and the actual currency. So people started seeing the actual currency go up and up and up, but the fictitious currency was still pretty stable. And so people all of a sudden started comparing 2 numbers. Hey, this price is going up. Oh, but look, this currency is still the same. What cost, $2 yesterday is still costing $2 or 2 reals today. This is great. So there seems to be something that's stable. And so it started actually bringing in a little bit of a confidence, even though there was false confidence, an illusion, but it started applying the brakes on the inflation. And slowly but surely, things started actually stabilizing long enough that they switched the old currency with the new currency that they had fictitiously created, and what was an illusion became the reality, and that recovered the economy for them. Now, if you ever hear somebody say this, you're going to say, you're out of your mind, right? That's not going to work. And exactly that's what we did. And the virtual fictitious currency became a real currency after the economy starts stabilizing in 6 months. So again, if our goal is to effect change, we have to take the time to understand what are the impediments, what are keeping us away from making these changes, and we want to be able to really, bring that confidence into people for us to be able to effect the change. That becomes very critical. And of course, the successful economy that followed really showed that their methods worked. It doesn't mean that's the right thing to do all the time, but again, taking the underlying theme is a team which has better confidence can attain better results than a team which doesn't. Now, this also goes back to, if you want to make a change and if you want your team to succeed with the change, what do you do in order to achieve that? And a team or anybody who is tired is not going to make good decisions. If somebody is not tired mentally and physically, they're going to make better decisions. So if I were to ask you to solve a hard problem, and if you have taken good rest, and you are in a good mood, and I give you this problem to solve, you're probably enthusiastic. You're like, oh, let's kick this one, and you're going to put your effort towards it. If you are drained, and you are tired, and you have spent way too much time on this, you worked all night on this one, and then I tell you to solve the problem in the morning, you're not going to be effective doing it. How many times have you seen this for yourself? There are days when I would be sitting and trying to write a piece of code, and it's 1 a.m. I could barely keep my eyes open. I'm struggling with this problem, and I cannot see the solution. And I tell myself, you know what? I'm going to leave this for now. And I would go to bed, I'd wake up in the morning, and I'm brushing my teeth. In 10 minutes, I'm like, oh, darn it, I know exactly how to solve the problem. And you feel angry, isn't it? Because you spent 3 hours fighting it, you couldn't solve the problem, and 15 minutes into brushing the teeth. Maybe that's the answer, right? Provide toothbrush to everybody at work, and maybe they find the solutions to it. But the point is, I'm much more relaxed to find the solution to it. So here is an experiment that was conducted to really figure this out. Mundane work drains energy and lowers productivity. So if what we do is mundane and boring, and if you're told to do what is not intellectually stimulating to you, you're going to lose interest in what you do. But it's even worse than that. You're not only going to lose interest in what you do, you tend to really not see things that need to be seen. A case in point, an example of this was that we all know the story of Titanic and what happened with the Titanic. But the story behind Titanic is that there were people on board whose job was to be messaging to the control towers and other ships in the area. But those people who had the responsibility for the safety of the ship and the navigation were told, your job is to send messages for people on the ship. And so people were just using that service to say, can you send a message to my uncle? Can you send a message to my aunt? And so these people were sending mundane messages than doing their actual work. And so in doing so, they got so bored and tired, they forgot actually that their real job was the safety and navigation. So there were messages that were telling them that there was treacherous conditions on the sea. And those messages, unfortunately, were ignored because they were busy doing all these mundane work. And this, of course, we know the result of that is lost life and the history that we know about. So it's something to think about. How can you eliminate mundane work? As an example, and I won't ask you to raise your hand right now, but I know a lot of companies have done this and they still do it. If you're working for those companies, you got to fill timesheets. I never understood that. You go to the company and they say, you got to fill timesheet. I'm like, what does that mean? I got to fill a timesheet. Well, you got to tell how many hours you worked. You got to tell what day you came into work and how long you worked. I refuse. I said, no, I'm not going to do timesheets. Well, this is a requirement. By whom? And why do you want me to fill timesheets? I'm a knowledge worker. I'm a creative worker. My job is not to sit there and fill timesheets. I got more important things to do. And similarly, I would have clients who come and tell me, you got to fill in an invoice with all the details. Where you had a meal, where you had your expenses. You got to tell me all the fine details. I said, no, I'm not going to do that for you. That's mundane. That's not a good use of my time. That's not a good use of my, skill. We're not going to spend our time doing all these, administrative things because you're going to take attention away from the creative work I can do. And so it is something for us to think about in the long run and ask the question, why are we doing it? And if you hire people to do paperwork, you know what happens? They are so good, they find ways for other people to do more paperwork. This is the wonderful skill of the people. And I won't mention the name of the company right now, but it's a huge company, and you all know their name. You all have used their product. Everyone has used their product. And I was doing training for them at a global level. I was doing training here in Europe. I was doing training for them around the world. And after doing training in several countries for them, I went into one of their offices. And I wish I could make up the story. This would be really funny if this was not true. So I go to their office, and on Monday morning at 8 o'clock, I'm at the door, and the person at the security says, "Oh, yes, I see your name here that you're visiting, and here is a paperwork for you to do." And it was an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. And I looked at the NDA and said, "Hey, I've got a global NDA with your head office in Europe. I've signed it. I've been doing training for your company for 3 years. The first time I'm in your division, in your unit in the city. But I've been doing training for them for 3 years." He said, "Well, yeah, that's great, but it's a requirement. You have to sign this NDA before you can go in." And I said, "Not a problem. I'll follow your rules. Give me the NDA." And I sign it, I date it, and say, "Here you go." This was Monday, by the way. And I go in and do the training. And on Tuesday morning, 8 o'clock, I showed up at the door. It was the same exact person. And it's the same exact me. And he said, "Welcome back." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Here's an NDA for you to sign." I said, "That's a really good joke." Funny, that's really funny. Thank you for saying it. He was not smiling. He said, "Excuse me, you have to sign it." I said, "You're not joking." He said, "No, it's a requirement." I said, "Let me understand this. Were you here yesterday, or did I mistake?" "Oh, I was here yesterday. I saw you." "So it's the same you, it's the same me. Did the company name change? You're still with the same company, right?" He was kind of grim. He was staring at me. "I'll vouch you. I still work for the same company. I didn't get hired by anybody else. So it's you, the same person. It's me, the same person. Nothing changed between you and me between yesterday and today. I got a global agreement. And I even signed your NDA yesterday. Why in the world do you want me to sign the NDA today? Can you explain it to me?" "Well, that's a requirement." "By whom?" "I will not sign it." "Well, sir, if you don't sign it, you're not going to the building." "No problem. I won't go into the building. Hey, I'm here because you guys wanted me to be here. Not that I wanted to be here. So I'm going to sit over there in the chair. And you can tell me, don't sit in the chair. You have the right to do it. And if you tell me that, I'm going to go lay on my bed in the hotel. Until you guys call me and tell me, I got 2 options for you. Let me into the building, I'll do my work, or you can call your head office, and I'll tell you the name of the person that I signed the contract with. Let that person call me and say, "Venkat, you got to sign the NDA today again." I will sign it. No questions asked. Because the person who hired me wants me to sign it, I will sign it. And then I'll have a talk with them next week, and this will be the last job I do. But these are 2 options. Let me in, or call your person and let him decide what to do. But I'm not going to sign your stupid NDA. "Well, you can sit here." I sat there. And about 10 minutes goes by, the person locally in charge of me doing the training came and said, "Venkat, why are you giving me trouble this morning?" I said, "I'm sorry, my goal is not to give you trouble. You guys call me here so I can come and effect change. How could I effect change if you ask me to do stupid things you already do? With all respect, I'm not going to do it. Here are the options again." And this person calls the topmost person of their division in the city and said, "We got a problem. We got an instructor here sent by our head office. He's not an employee of our company. He's a consultant. And he refuses to sign the NDA. He signed it yesterday. He says he's got a global NDA, but he won't sign it. I don't know what to do. And I hear the person on the other line saying, let the man in, let him do the job. And the person's like, oh, thank you. And then she looks at the guard and says, like that. And he's like, sir, you can go in. So the third day, Wednesday, at 8 o'clock, I show up. And it's the same guy. It's the same me. I go in. I said, hi. I said, oh, yes. And he takes the NDA. And then he realizes, well, sir, no, you can go. And it's unbelievable. I know this is a bit of an extreme situation. But when we do things that make zero sense, and we are creating stuff for people to do that doesn't contribute to the real creative work they're supposed to be focusing on, how can we get different results? So it's really important for us to remove all the process, all the stupid things we ask people to do so they can focus on what they're really there for. That becomes very important. This also goes back to a study that they did. A group of researchers wanted to study how people are effective in problem solving. So what they did is they took two groups of people. For one group, as they came, both the groups were given the same problem to solve, no difference. And the group was several people. So it's not like you had somehow one group was much capable than the other. It was a fairly even distribution. And when the groups came in, without the groups knowing about it, to the first group, they would feed nice cookies and nice pleasant things to eat. And so this group is having a good snack. And then they go into a room and they're given a problem to solve. The second group, they were given radish to eat. Anyone here raise your hand if you love radish? Oh, this is the largest people of radish lovers I've ever seen. I hate radish. I would rather chew this desk rather than eating radish, honestly. But I don't know why humans ever tasted radish. I want to invent a time machine so I can go back in time. And the very first day a human wanted to taste a radish, I would have said, that's poison. Don't do it. And the entire human race would have avoided radishes, right? Well, except for the few who love radishes, the rest of us, this group was given radishes to eat. And they were like sitting there and eating radish. The other room had people really eating interesting snacks. And they ate radishes. And then they went into the room and they were asked to solve the problem. And consistently they saw the team that ate radishes couldn't solve the problems. So, moral of the story, cafeterias don't have radishes, right? So, in other words, it really makes a difference how we feel before we are given a problem to solve. If you want your team to solve problems more effectively, you want to make sure that they are emotionally in the state of mind so they can tackle the problems. If they are weak, so why is it so hard after eating radishes? Because your mind is going through such a hardship already. Oh my God, here's another radish I have to eat. It's not similar. There's no do you get stimulated eating radishes versus eating cookies, right? Your mind is on fire, right? That's why I love spicy food. Give me spicy food, my mind is on fire, right? I can solve any problem you give me. Give me radishes have no spice in them. It's bland, and it's really hard. And this reminds me of an experience. I was in Mexico, and a good friend of mine and I were speaking in a conference, and the conference organizer said, let's go to a restaurant. So we went to the restaurant. We just wanted to have some fun. So we're sitting and having a meal, and we suddenly said, hey, this food is not spicy. The conference organizers took it for real. We were just joking. So immediately called the waiter and said, this is not spicy for these people. Can you help? And he comes back and says, here you go, and gives me a little bit more spice. And we both are like, nah, not good enough. A little bit more, not good enough. About the fourth time, the waiter is getting very frustrated. He's like, we've been increasing spice, and these people just doesn't seem to really get it. He says, I'll be right back. Walks into the kitchen and says, there's a bunch of people out there. They keep saying this is not spicy. So the chef comes out, and he's like, who is asking for more spice here? And he looks at the two of us sitting next to each other and says, people of Indian origin, namaste. I'm sorry, I cannot compete with this. I give up, and he walks away. So essentially, we keep increasing the spice level. Radish is the other side of the spectrum. So now you know why I cannot take radish, is because that's the least spicy of anything you can imagine. Well, but when there's research to prove it, right? So you want to really stimulate your team if you want better results from them. So how do you do this? Environment matters a lot. So environment, before you can get better results from your team, ask the question, how can I change the environment so the team can get better results for us? And ask your surrounding, what can you do? There was a study where they said a team with natural light coming in is more productive than a team without any windows. And I'm not even kidding with you. One of the first jobs I had, this entire floor had one window. One window. And you know what the company did? They put a shelf in front of the window. And I said, there's one window. Why put a shelf in front of it? They said, because nobody has windows, so you cannot have one either. Go figure, right? So what can you do to create an environment so the team can be productive and can give us success? Another research. This was parole officers. Their job was to evaluate criminals and decide whether they should be let go or not. These are criminals with 10 years in prison, 15 years in prison. And what they found out was a very shocking trend. They analyzed all the reviews this board did for several years. And they found out almost consistently, they released more people in the mornings and fewer people in the afternoon. Now think about that for a minute, right? If you know somebody who's in jail and wants to come out after serving enough time, and you say, hey, I'm going to appear in front of the parole board. You say, please, schedule in the morning, not in the afternoon, because the chance goes up. But why? Because the officers were tired by the end of the afternoon, listening to case after case after case. So in the afternoon, they were not able to think clearly. And so they thought to themselves, we're not able to really analyze and think properly. We don't want to make a mistake releasing somebody that becomes offensive on the street. Let's err on the side of safety. So reject. So they were rejecting more people when they were tired, and they were releasing more people when they were really alert, because they were able to evaluate a lot better. Kind of shocking, isn't it, when you think about it? So one way you can really help your team to get better results is really to have frequent breaks. By having frequent breaks, it actually is a lot better than teams that slog on for several hours at a time. And a team which has regular breaks is more productive than a team with fewer breaks in general. So if you're going to be really working with the team for long hours, maybe you have an all-day session, make sure you have enough breaks in between where teams can go do other activities so they can come back and start working again, and we get better results doing so. And in my own case, I can vouch for this. I'm a huge fan of hiking. And there are times when I am sitting and solving I wake up really, really early. I'm a workaholic. I love hiking, but I love working as well. So I typically start my day around 3 or 3:30 in the morning. And I would be sitting and cranking out a problem, trying to solve a particular problem, and I would have promised my wife that let's go hiking around 7 or 7:30. And I would be struggling with the problem for hours on end, and the alarm goes off. I'm like, oh, let's go. And we would go hiking. And I've been struggling with this. I'll tell her oftentimes, very kind lady, she would listen to all the things I talk about, problem solving. And within about 10, 15 minutes after being away from the computer, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I know how to solve the problem right now. Just that 15, 20 minutes away can help us to solve the problems, and having those breaks are extremely important. And of course, watch for these confirmation biases. I can't tell you how many times when people ask questions or when they are talking about things, they're not as much interested in changing their thoughts, but getting confirmation for their own thoughts. This is something we have to work towards and address that and recognize the confirmation biases quite often. But a team really needs motivation and inspiration to really succeed. So support with positive reinforcements. Like I said earlier, provide people who can help them through the journey, who can be supportive, who can show how to really solve problems so they're not tired trying to solve the problem. They can find solutions and move on. That becomes very easy. And finally, find emotional motivators and use them. One example of this is a hospital. You may be surprised, right? Because people working in healthcare, you would expect that they know better. But the Detroit hospital wanted people to wash their hands because the infection rates were high. But people working in the hospital were the least interested in doing so. And so they were struggling to find out, how do we encourage more people to wash their hands? So what they did is they started really posting on the different areas in the building the number of infections that they have and the amount of bacteria they were seeing on different surfaces. And people are like, oh my gosh, this is evidence that they're able to see. So imagine I post on the door right there how many bacteria or viruses are on that door. You are going to think very differently, isn't it? I mean, I travel around the world. I cannot tell you how many times I'm in a hotel. I know this is gross. I apologize for this. I can't tell you how many times I'm in a hotel or an airport bathroom and I see people use the restroom and walk right away. I'm like, no, I never want to shake hand of this person. And you would say, Venkat, that's old news. That was pre-pandemic. No, I'm talking about yesterday, day before yesterday, 2 weeks ago. People don't change, right? And what if we can educate people by showing, oh, thanks for walking away without washing your hand, but that's a number of bacteria, and I think we'll freak out, right? Imagine these becoming digital, and it's going to display the infection rate of each of the door you're going to touch on. Well, that's what they started doing. And they started seeing changes right away, and people started washing hands knowing, oh my gosh, look, there's so much of infection that's possible on these doors, and that started coming down, the germs, and of course, the rate of washing hands went up. So to summarize what we talked about, convince yourselves first before you're trying to convince other people. It's incredibly difficult and don't assume you're convinced, make sure you really are. Address the problem, but don't push for one particular solution. Understand the problem first and educate the team before you try to get results from them. Let the team explore, let them figure out, and provide a clear path for change and help them with support and find what works and amplify it so others can learn from other people who have been through that journey. Introduce behavioral change before you can expect results, and remove activities that drain energy of people. And keep an eye for the energy level and make sure that it's up for people to really be productive. And watch out for confirmation biases and support with positive encouragement and use emotional motivators. Hope that was useful. Thank you so much.